Hi. Thanks for coming to spend some of your Friday talking with me. I appreciate it. As some of you know, I have some of you in classes. I teach motion graphics and animation here. Do we have mostly film or some design people? All film, some design.
Video game art.
Video game art. Animation. Cool. So I teach motion graphics and animation, and we go through how to do stuff in After Effects and Cinema 4D and play with all this stuff. And I do that a couple days a week. And the rest of my time during the rest of the week, I do that sort of stuff and make After Effects animations for TV and for films. And I work with ad agencies to do different sorts of videos and all kinds of 2D, 3D animation and lots of design and art stuff. And I work independently, and I'm my own boss, and it's by far the happiest I've ever been in my career. And it took me a long time to get here, and I had to learn a lot of stuff along the way. And a lot of the stuff that was the hardest for me to learn wasn't how to use After Effects or Photoshop. It was all this other stuff that I had to learn, these kind of sometimes hard, sometimes easier lessons that go into having a career in a creative industry and having a job as a creative person. And that was kind of the idea behind the talk. Is it seems like you should be able to go to school and learn how to make all this stuff and get done and get a job, and people just will give you money for it. But it's not that easy, and I learned a lot of stuff along the way, and that's kind of what I want to talk with you guys about today, is not playing around in the computer stuff, but my story and all the stuff that I learned along the way. So I'll tell you my story, and I'll just start from the beginning. This is me as a kid in the 80s. I was pretty cool. And I liked video games and sports, and I liked drawing everything. And I liked to draw stuff not from my imagination, but I liked drawing stuff I was into, like video games and these little code books I would make, and sports, and NFL teams, and all these teams and things that I liked. I didn't know this was a job yet. And I used what I had because it was the 80s and there wasn't personal computers yet, so I would draw this stuff with pencils and colored pencils. And then when I got older, this came out. Does anyone remember this? Old enough to know? And this blew me away, and this was a lot of my childhood was spent playing with this. Finally, I could use a computer or a TV screen as it was, because we didn't have computers yet, and draw stuff on the computer and change colors and do all of this stuff. And when I was in high school, my parents were nice enough to send me to computer graphics camp. Thanks, parents. Because that's where all the cool kids go. And for the first time, I got to play around with all of these tools to make this stuff for real, like Photoshop and Illustrator and Flash and older versions of 3D software that were much more difficult to use. And I realized that if this was somehow a job to just play with all this stuff, this is what I wanted to do, and that was really all I wanted to do, was just make things on the computer and make art and figure out the rest later. So I went to college to learn more about making this stuff, and my on-campus job my first year was calling people who used to go to the school and asking them for money. And I hated it. I hated going to work, and I had two other jobs when I was in high school, and I didn't like those either, and I always thought that this was just something that I had to get used to, or something that I didn't understand yet, that you're just supposed to be okay going to work. And I never really liked that. And about the same time, I started to take design classes, and my roommate in college was in a band, and I said, I'm taking these design classes, you guys need t-shirts, let me try and make this for you guys. And they said, okay. And it was the first time I had a project, I had a client, and I had a timeline. It had to be done by their next show, or it wouldn't work. So I played around in Illustrator, I made a couple designs in a couple different colors, and they liked it and got it printed and brought it to their show, and people bought it and were wearing it. And I was like, holy crap, it worked. Because up until then, I thought that you were supposed to go to these classes and then you get out of school and you get a job and Someone tells you what stuff you're supposed to make. And I had just made this on the weekend, and now it was out there in the world. And I wanted to do more of this. And I figured if I did enough of these little projects, I wouldn't have to go to that crappy job that I hated going to. And I knew that there were other bands that they knew, so I thought I could just do lots of these little projects and hopefully it would add up. But I knew that I couldn't just tell them that I knew how to make this stuff. I needed some way to show it. So I figured out how to make business cards, and I made my first website to show off my couple little projects on. And through doing that process, I learned a lot about marketing myself and selling your work and showing off your work. So I got my first site up. It was probably terrible by today's standards, but I was really excited about it. And after I got it up, I realized a couple things. I started to see other companies that did just this stuff and worked with musicians and other clients and organizations, and this was someone's entire job. And I hadn't thought about it like that. I didn't know the word freelance yet. And I wanted to be like these people if I could. And I also realized that their work was a lot better than my couple projects, and I didn't really understand why, but I wanted to get better. So as it was, because there wasn't YouTube yet, because this was 12, 13 years ago, I started buying design magazines that came with DVDs, and that was our form of what is now the tutorial video. And I got obsessed, and I wanted to learn all of this stuff and how to play with all of these programs and do all of these different things. And I wanted to start to learn Flash and do animation, because that was the big animation tool at the time. They didn't teach it in my school, but some of the DVDs had it, so I just started making all of this stuff. And I realized when I was in school, there's lots of other places that needed design and animation stuff too, so I started doing everything and every little job I possibly could and telling everyone that I knew that I wanted to make all of these things. And I had design classes, but we'd only do 3 projects a year, and I wanted to do 100, so I started doing work for the grad office to do some website stuff. I made the posters for the student union. I still did a bunch of band projects here and there. And I did all of these little projects. Over the summer, I worked for a printing company. I learned a lot about screen printing, all while I was also going to school to learn about this stuff. And I didn't have to go back to the crappy job ever. And I did this for 3 years, and I did all of these little projects to help pay for school. And before I knew it, I had deadlines as a college kid on Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night to get all this stuff done that I had agreed to do. And I wanted to keep doing all of this stuff, and it forced me to learn about time management and prioritizing projects and breaking projects down into how many hours I should be spending, because I had one to do, but as soon as I got that done, I had to move to the next one, and they were all due, and I had to figure out how to get all this stuff done if I wanted to keep doing this. So I did that through college, and I got out of college, and I still thought you were supposed to just go get a job. So I came to Chicago. I didn't know anyone in the industry, but because I had built up that process of marketing myself and how to send my work around while I was in college and just kept redoing and redoing my portfolio, I was able to send that out pretty quickly, and I was able to find a job in Chicago pretty quickly, working at the Leo Burnett building kind of around the corner from here, doing Flash animations for companies like Nintendo and Finish Line and all these cool projects to start out. And it was really exciting when I was 22. And when I got to that job, I realized that they started to hire other people who were a lot better at this stuff than I was. And through college, I thought that I was the best person in the room and no one worked as hard as I could. And I thought I'd get out of college and be done and know everything. And all of these other people around me were way better than me. But that was great because I could keep learning from them and try and get better and better and get my work to that level. So I worked there for 3 years, and I did a lot of cool projects, but some of the projects that I had to do, I wasn't that into, and I always struggled with being given work that I didn't necessarily like to do and was always told, no, you could just try to see the creative process in it if you don't like it. And I never got a hold of that, and I wasn't happy with that whole process of just not going out and finding the projects I want to do and doing them. And about 3 years into it, some of the really smart people started to leave and go to other companies, so I decided, okay, maybe this company isn't working for me, but I still thought I was supposed to have a job. So I found a job at another agency down the street and thought that would go better. And the first year there was really fun. I was doing a lot of sports and music stuff and making After Effects animations for Justin Timberlake shows and some pretty cool stuff at the beginning. And that happens a lot of times with jobs. A year into it, things got shifted around and projects get moved around and you get assigned to things. And a year later, I wasn't doing the cool stuff anymore, and I didn't really have a say in my work. And again, I was really frustrated about this and didn't want to work like this. I loved making things all the time, but someone else was telling me what work I should be excited about doing. And at that time, I had a couple of friends break off and do their own thing independently, and I thought, I could do this. I know how to do all of this stuff. I've been working and kind of doing work on the side at these jobs the whole time. So I decided I was going to quit my job and try and do my own thing. So I told my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, and my family that I'm going to leave the comfort of a job and try and get my own clients and my own work and have a say in the work that I want to do. So I did, and that was 4 years ago, and that's what I've been doing since. And now I have some of the most fun clients I could imagine. I make some stuff for CBS Channel 2 and make a lot of their sports animations of the helmets banging into each other and make the logos fly around. And I do some stuff with a restaurant company that does all the NFL, so I get to design some NFL stuff. And I do a lot of these cool projects, and I got to build up my own clients. And when I started to do this, I realized why I was able to pull this off in the way that I wanted wasn't only because I knew how to use After Effects really well at that point and I knew all of the programs. It was because I had learned a lot about these other things through college and through working, like marketing myself and how to manage deadlines and all of that sort of stuff. Because getting a new project is great, but if you don't do a good job at the first one, word gets around and you don't retain clients. And that's kind of what you have to do if you want to work a full-time job or independently. And I also realized that all those smart people that I had worked with that left the old jobs that I worked at now worked at other places, and I was still in touch with a lot of them. And I realized that I had built up from knowing nobody this network of people all over the city, and as it is now, kind of all over the country and the world, who keep in touch and know what I do and know that I do a good job at. I realized that it was a lot of this other stuff of getting work and being good at, yes, the After Effects part, but keeping a lot of that work and being able to pick your own projects and do what makes you the happiest, because places that would hire me know that I could do all of that and press all the buttons, but I also know how to communicate about the projects. I know what a deadline means. I know if they say it's due in sometimes 3 days, I can't go overboard and decide I want to spend 2 weeks on it, because that's kind of the part of the project. And that's kind of how I got here, kind of starting out just being a kid who liked to draw. And a lot of the major stuff that I learned along the way to get to where I am, which is, as I said, really the happiest I've ever been with my career, and that's where I hope you guys get to. So that's a lot of the stuff I want to hit on today, is kind of what I learned through that process. So I want to give you guys kind of the bullet point list of what I think matters. The one, I'm a big proponent of this, just make things every day. And it doesn't have to be a whole project, and it doesn't have to be a crazy 3D animation the whole day, but if you just get in the habit of trying to be creative, even if it's just trying to take a cool photo as you're walking down the street and you see like ice or something, or if you have time learning how to do something, the more stuff you make, the better your work becomes, and the more you get in the habit of doing work. And if you don't have projects, that's okay. You can just make things up and work towards building a site and building a portfolio and getting enough work to show that you went through this process. A lot of times you know how to make work good. And this is the big one, just not being frustrated about, but embracing deadlines. Even, again, if you have to make them up yourself, if you're doing your own reel or portfolio as you're doing at the end of school, if it's just out there at the end of whenever I get this done, that's impossible to work towards and you don't get to the end. But if you say, even if it's your own deadline, I'm going to have this done in 2 weeks, it's going up in 2 weeks, it forces you to sit down and figure out how you're going to get that stuff done and think about how you can prioritize what you want to put into it, and just being okay with that. And then when you get into, if you want to do that sort of stuff, client work, you understand what it means when they say, I need this in a week, or if they say I need this in 2 months, how to back that up and break that down into smaller deadlines so it gives you a goal to work towards. Again, this is a big one of just getting your work out there. You can work on a project and obsess over it and go over your reel for hours, months, and years, but the sooner you get your work out there and start showing people and getting a portfolio together and a reel and getting your work out in the world, the sooner and quicker it's going to be to start doing whatever work it is you want to do and doing more work. If you just feel like you have to make everything perfect and wait until it's all polished and done, you're never going to finish. But again, if you say, I have to get this reel done, I don't have enough projects, so I'm going to make some projects up or find projects to do, and get your work out there and take advantage of stuff like Behance or Cargo and ways to, there's tons of stuff online now just to put all this stuff together and get your work out there and get your work everywhere you can. Put your work on Vimeo and YouTube and your own site and Twitter, and tell all of your friends about it, and tell your parents, and tell all of your relatives, because you'd be surprised who remembers that, and sometimes even a year or two later, where work suddenly comes from just because you talk about it, and people can see it, and people that you don't know hear about it from someone else that you may have talked to once, and they're able to send that information along and check that out and get in touch with you. As you start to get your work out there, and as you guys go through school, you start to meet a lot of people. You meet people with different skills, and you start to realize and see, who's good at what, who does lots of things, especially you guys in all of these industries like film or design or game design. People start to be really good at a couple little things, and you start to realize, like if you're into lighting or working with a camera, you want to remember who those people are. And when you get into jobs, keeping in touch with those people and it not being annoying, but really taking advantage of things like LinkedIn to go and keep track of that sort of stuff. And this is a big one for me because I honestly work at a different job sometimes every month, and I meet hundreds of people a year. And sometimes someone I met for a $200 project 6 months later leaves and goes to another job, and he remembers that that project went well and tells his bosses to get in touch with me, and then because we're still connected, I can keep that relationship going. And the more people you work with, the more classes you take, and the more different jobs you have, or people who you tell that you like to do this stuff and show it to, the more and more people who are going to know that you're good at this and you like to do this and will call on you to do that. And I always try to include this in my classes and jobs, and this is something I struggled with at the beginning with client work, is not just being okay with criticism, but asking for criticism. And when I started out, you make something and you're so excited about it and you're like, it's perfect, and then you show it to your boss or someone and they're like, it's not perfect, or maybe they don't like it at all. And being not only okay with that, but finding the people whose opinions you value and asking for that criticism and understanding why, and being able to talk about why something is good or not good or pretty or ugly, or the design is working or not, and improving your work through the process of getting criticism, talking about it, asking people for that, getting their opinions. And I write this as value your hours and not just time, because time is such a big concept. And if you say, I'm working on this project, I have to get it down to time. If you think about things in hours and how many hours you want to spend on something. And if you're doing a project, how many hours realistically you should be spending on it to make that worth your time. If you break things down into just thinking about hours and blocks of time and making, eventually, if you get busy, which is great, list of things that you have to do and figuring out, okay, how many hours is this going to take? If you just have a project that's make a music video for a client by 2 months from now, it's too big of a concept. But if you say, I'm going to make this music video and it's 3 minutes long and the maximum amount of time I can spend on this is 40 hours to make this worth my time before I have to work on something else, it's a lot easier to wrap your head around that, and then you can be managing that time, and you can know if things get towards that ceiling of that you need to have that conversation and figure out how to reach an agreement and move on and keep doing other projects and keep going. And have design heroes or whatever industry you're into. When I was in college, I thought I was the biggest hotshot. My design instructor was always on my case because I could name every player on a sports team, and I knew all of these places, and he was really into logo design and Paul Rand, and he would tell me, you know all of these, you can name everyone. Do you know anyone who's good at design and this sort of stuff? And I didn't. And it pissed me off at first, but then I started to think about that. And when I started to get my work up there and look at other companies that I wanted to be like, I started to realize these companies that I looked up to, like Go Media and Video Copilot, and keeping track of, what my heroes are that I kind of aspire to keep always working to try to get there, and to have some, places like Grayscale Gorilla and, Chuck Anderson of No Pattern, and people in your industry of whatever you like to do that, you can hold as high as just the superstar athlete or, whatever you see in your other interests. And this one sounds kind of weird, but be uncomfortable. Get yourself in situations that you're not comfortable in. If you get really good at making 10-second animations in After Effects and you're doing the same thing and you're just knocking it out and you're not doing anything different, you're not going to be learning and you're not going to be developing. But if you, say I'm really good at music videos, I've done 100 of them, it's easy, I can keep going. Try doing something else too. Try branching out. Try doing different work. Try something that challenges you. Or if you're doing the same sort of projects, make it harder for yourself, even if your client doesn't ask you to. Push your work to be what you want to be doing, as opposed to just taking the work and saying, okay, I can do this, I can knock it out, and then be done with it. Put yourself in uncomfortable design situations that you have to work and figure yourself out. The most I've learned in the times when I've learned the most in a project is when I kind of knew how to do what I had agreed to do, or sometimes not at all yet, but I said I'd figure it out. And I forced myself to figure it out because I had said, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to figure out how to make this more complicated 3D, or make this web design and Flash thing before Flash kind of died. Do what I have in mind and what someone wants to see. I'm going to, this is uncomfortable. I could say, no, it's not possible. But, you'll figure it out and you learn a lot. And you start talking to people who know how to do it and learning from other people. And this one is important to me, is ideally, hopefully you do get really busy. And, this is stuff I'm passionate. I love After Effects. I could spend every day messing around with After Effects and Cinema 4D or Maya or all of these tools and things that I like doing. And hopefully you get really busy and start doing a lot of work. But you have to remember to go outside. That's hard to think of now because it's freezing in Chicago, but just remembering to work really hard, but know that you have to take a break at some point, and it's going to make your work better if you work, and step away from it, go for a walk, go for a bike ride, go play basketball, just don't break your leg. whatever you like to do. And it does also help you if you do that sort of stuff. And that's kind of how I try and structure my work, because I work from home a lot of times, and 8 hours a day is a big amount of time to just say, okay, especially if you have a deadline on a Friday and I know I have 40 hours that I could wait to do the work. But if you say, okay, I'm going to take a break and go for a walk or a run or something, or schedule meetings at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock or in the middle of the day, then I have a compartmentalized time. I have 4 hours. So now I have to work towards this little miniature deadline I've set for myself of, okay, I have the whole week, but by 1 o'clock today, I want to be able to take a break. And if I'm not as far with my work, I'm not going to feel like I should. So I'm going to work that long, take a break, give myself perspective, take my mind off of that, come back to it, be re-energized, have time to think, have time to process, and just have value and understand it is important as you're working and getting really into this stuff to force yourself to step away sometimes. So those are kind of the big idea things, besides learn lots of After Effects and learn all the programs and study typography and illustration and design, that I think are the most important and are all the things that I learned throughout my career working at a lot of different jobs and lots of different industries. And I do want to talk with you guys some just about that sort of stuff and have some question and answer and see what you guys think. Yeah.
How did you market yourself? What kind of promotional material did you use?
I started making business cards, just basic ones, and then I started to find printing companies, and I was doing a lot of print stuff for bands in the music industry, so I really liked doing that stuff. So I made stickers and I put them everywhere, and just as much stuff as I could to be able to talk to people both in person and mainly also be able to have it online, because then that allows you to be able to network in person and online. So as much as you need, but promotional design for your own stuff is kind of a fun thing anyway. So I know people have made stickers, flyers, all sorts of stuff, and all of those are good design challenges. Yes.
I've got two questions. The first one with the be uncomfortable thing. How do you?
Usually I can get close. I have a good enough understanding at this point to know if I've seen something and they're saying I want it to be like this, it must be possible, and I can figure it out. And usually I can get close to there. If a client is asking for something like they need what I know is 100 hours of work in 5 days, there's a lot of sometimes difficult conversations of explaining that that's not realistic, or sending them an estimate of what it would cost and take. So be a little uncomfortable, but don't bury yourself in something that that you can't, that might not be possible. But challenge yourself to not just do the same stuff over and over.
The designers that you're into, or are they books or?
Now I find a lot of stuff on the web, but when I was younger and I was more into magazines, it was that sort of stuff. But I just look around online for what I like to do and go through videos constantly. I got into all the trap code plugins because I knew a friend who used them and I wanted to learn those, and I started going through their site and I found all these examples, and that's how I found things like Corridor Digital that does all the crazy YouTube videos that I look up to. And then when I sat down and said I need to really learn Cinema 4D, that's when I saw Grayscale Gorilla site and Nick Campbell and those sorts of people.
Shaky or anything at any point, or did it intimidate you at first?
Well, I kind of played around with 3D for years, and I started learning Maya a lot for modeling before I got into Cinema 4D, but I'd always put off learning 3D software because I was really, really good at Photoshop and Illustrator and everything Adobe made. And 3D software kind of scared the hell out of me because it just did not look like what I wanted it to look like. It didn't work. They wanted it to work, and it's hard once you learn something to shut off what you know and kind of start over and figure out these different ways. So it was, when I started to learn 3D software, it was really intimidating. When I started to learn Cinema 4D, just as an opinion, I thought that was a lot more approachable, but that was kind of difficult just because I spent years learning Maya for this stuff, and then I wanted to force myself to learn Cinema 4D, and it was kind of trying to learn and accept that things are slightly different, and there's different ways to do stuff. But 3D software can be a little intimidating if you're used to like 2D design and animation, but it's definitely good stuff to pick up, and it's good. There's a lot of stuff, especially for Cinema 4D. There's a lot of stuff online for just getting started, and it helps to just, if you're, same thing as if it's a project of say, once a day I'm going to spend an hour or two watching stuff of people who know how to do this and figuring it out. When I first started out, that's a good question. I had no idea, and I just kind of guessed and kind of went through the process of kind of figuring that out, of saying, band website, $200, and I started to realize how much time things would start to take. And then more and more I got into the industry, talking to more people who were at different levels, and just, being comfortable talking about money and rates and things like that. Specifically when I left full-time jobs after doing kind of full-time work for about 5 years and doing a little freelance here and there, I knew a lot of different people, and I was comfortable enough to kind of be like, we're at about the same level. What are you charging? And kind of being comfortable telling companies this is what my time is worth, and kind of having like not a chart, but kind of a range that I know that I'm comfortable with, depending on how busy I am, and just being confident in, this is the lowest I would go, and this is kind of the target amount, and just communicating that, and just being confident and having that conversation about money, which is a hard thing because this happens over and over in my sort of thing, but a lot of people, you just have that conversation once and you get a job and you don't really think about it. But not being scared of that conversation of, you might overprice them, and you might overprice by like a little bit, and then you can get that agreement. But if you say way under what they have in mind, most companies probably have an idea in their mind of what they want to spend on X. And if you pitch a cost and they're like, oh, okay, great, it probably means that you could have charged more. So just being comfortable and confident that that's a conversation, put what you value your hours at on the table, and see what their response is. And it's probably not going to be, that's way too much, buy. And I think that's what a lot of people kind of get hesitant about, the money thing, of just thinking that it's going to scare the client away if it seems like it's too much. But just being comfortable with having that conversation, here's an estimate. I always start with an estimate with hours, cost, and notes, like time of revisions, amount of revisions, okay, so they understand what this big number means, and see what they say and set up a time to talk further about that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. How important is it to you to draw up contracts before a project, or even ask for a deposit?
Very. And the shitty thing is that I learned that, I learned that having a contract and getting a deposit, because the first time I got burned, when I was about 22, I agreed to do a fashion website for like $2,000, and I was super excited about it. And I had a contract that I found online, but I never got a deposit, and I never got paid because they kept stringing me along, and the contract didn't really mean anything because I still didn't have money. But it's important to have in writing either way what you're agreeing to, and having all of those notes of, this is what we're agreeing to, because they want to understand, building a commercial or something is kind of a big thing. But if it's written out, not just what the financial terms are, but this is what we both have to meet. Not only I am going to be on time because I know I'm going to meet my deadlines, but if it's due in a month and I'm going to do something by Friday, when I need to hear back about it in order to stay on the deadline that we've agreed to. And also have in there the financial terms, like I start based on when I get a deposit, and being comfortable knowing that if they aren't going to pay that, or it's not what you're comfortable with, not getting too excited and starting the work. Or there's kind of different situations depending on the type of, like, direct stuff with people, companies that I have not worked with. If it's just a one-off project, I'll do that sort of thing. Some bigger agencies a lot of times have hourly contracts where it's kind of a net thing of they pay 15, 30 days later. and we'll have the contracts, but always looking through those and making sure if you're provided a contract, what you're agreeing to. Does that make sense?
And then you get the rest of it.
Yeah,
know,
it depends.
basically-
It depends like how big of a project, but it's good again to break it down into milestones. Say if it's a 30-second commercial and the deadline is 2 weeks out, starting with you pay a deposit. Week 1, we take a look at the storyboards on this date, so scheduling that. Week 2, we look at the rough cut, and if it's like a bigger number, you could break it down as at that point on that review, the next payment is due. On final okay and sign off, that's when the final payment is due. That's when the assets are transferred over and given out. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So as much as you would break it down to make yourself comfortable in knowing what you're agreeing to.
Versus just going like getting out of school and right away trying to get people to hire you for random little jobs. Do you recommend kind of just trying to get a job first?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I have my experience, and I think it was a good experience for me to have gone through because I could not have pulled it off. Like I was doing lots of little band projects, but not doing bigger stuff and not understanding kind of all of the other parts. And I learned when I was at full-time jobs a lot of that stuff along the way and got in a lot of arguments and got pissed off a lot, but kind of learned a lot of how to just navigate the industry and also met a lot of people because it would have been a lot harder to keep if I got out of school and said I'm going to do just my own thing.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been a lot harder to keep learning as much if I didn't know anybody. But a couple of the major benefits of having worked at full-time jobs like that is kind of starting to develop networks of people that you know and seeing them go to different jobs and keeping in touch and learning if it's, this sort of stuff, what the different jobs mean and what a designer does versus an art director and what like a project manager does of all just organizing all of this little thing and how all of these things are related and see how the other people talk to clients and kind of learn from that. I think it was, in my opinion at least, it was a good experience for me to have gone through and dealt with, and that's kind of why I'm able to do what I'm doing now. I wouldn't go back to that, but I'm glad that a lot of what I learned was having to go through that process. When you start getting to, if it's just to do the same sort of work that you're doing, when you start to get to a point when you can't do all the work you're being asked to do, and if you know people who are trustworthy enough to do that sort of work. And it kind of depends personally on if you want to get to running a business of people doing this sort of work, or if you just like to make, all of the things. Does that make sense? And I've kind of gone back and forth with, no matter how old I get, I like to make the stuff. But if you're getting too busy, or you have kind of a diverse bit, like film, for example, I know what my specialty is, but I know, what if I need someone to do camera production or lighting, that's not my thing, and I know the people to call on to do that so that it can be my name as my work, but knowing what I'm best at and knowing what are not my strengths, and I would need to bring in other people.
Good.
All right, well, thank you guys for coming and listening to me talk and hanging out. I didn't even ask.